Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Bienvenidos a una conversación más de poder ambiental. Hoy vamos a tener una conversación muy interesante que tiene que ver con agua y con cambio climático. Y para eso estamos con John Matthews. John estudió antropología cultural en la Universidad de Chicago. Es doctor en ecología y biología evolucionaria de la Universidad de Texas. John fue director del programa global de agua dulce y adaptación climática de la WWF. Fue director de agua dulce y cambio climático en conservación internacional, dos organizaciones globales muy importantes a nivel de conservación, y hace 13 años es el director ejecutivo de la Alianza Global para la Adaptación del Agua. John, good morning. Thank you for being here with us.
Muchas gracias. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So, what do you say if we start by the beginning? If you could please briefly describe what the AGWA does, its origins, and its overall goal.
Sure. AGWA, Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, is an NGO that really started as a partnership for shared learning. There were many of us that were working on water-related issues, and we had lots of concerns about climate change, but we weren't sure if climate represented a big threat, a small threat, a big change in how we managed water resources, or a small change. And we recognized that we really needed each other, and that we needed to essentially be able to learn together, learn across different disciplines, learn across different kinds of institutions, learn globally. As you mentioned in your introduction, I'm an ecologist by training, but the other co-founder, Diego Rodriguez, he's from Uruguay. He's an economist with the World Bank. And so right at the beginning, you had this kind of deep partnership between very different domains. He was really focused on economic development from an investment perspective, me from natural resources and conservation, and how we thought about how climate change was really quite a profound revolution in how we thought about our work on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, that's great. John, when you mention partnership, the initial partnership was confirmed by whom first? And when you were saying learn together, what were the main things that you had to learn about?
I think one of the very first things that most of us who were working together saw was that climate change actually presented a really big shift in how we thought about sustainability altogether. And the easiest way to represent that is most of the ways that we think about growth and prosperity, the way we think about managing natural resources, is we look to the past and we say we need to either steer back to past conditions as our kind of target, or we use some increment of time, maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years, and we say that's going to tell us what the next 20 or 30 or 40 years is going to look like. And climate change is it scrambles all of that. It actually says we don't know what the future is going to look like, and almost the most invisible part of that future is really the water cycle. And so it's not just the water that we see in rivers and lakes. It's the precipitation. It happens to be raining here today. It could be you're in Colombia. It could be the Paramos, the big wetlands that are up in the Andes. It could be the changes that are happening with snowpack and glaciers. It could be the water that we see in groundwater, how quickly it recharges, how quickly we're withdrawing it, or how much we need for it. And so the uncertainty actually about the future means that we, instead of being really precise, that says this is what we need to do exactly as we move forward in time with reference to things that have happened in the past, is really undermined, and being able to think forward in that way is something that our institutions are not really good at. We're not really good about dealing with kind of a broader range of potential conditions and outcomes. That seems like maybe a really technical issue, but it actually is not. I raise my kids, thinking like, how was I raised? But there are lots of new things now that I have to account for with my son. New technologies, new types of social media, and new choices that maybe he has in terms of education, career that were never open to me. And I would actually say that has a lot of maybe it's kind of a strong analogy for where we are right now. We have to sort of relearn our role in the global economy and in our local economies now.
Okay, John, thank you. So, what you were saying that water is very important, the water cycle is very important in climate change. Why is it important that water is identified as crucial within the climate change framework?
It's a really powerful question. And I'd say that in a sense, there are kind of three phases that I've seen in how we think about water and climate change. The first phase, the phase where most people really still are, is thinking about water as a hazard. This is when you hear language around droughts and floods, around hurricanes, when you hear about extreme precipitation events that are occurring. That's water as a threat, and that's important. We need to be able to address water as a threat. I think that the next kind of major way that you hear water talked about around climate change is the so-called water sector, and in practical terms, this is like engineering in water. This is water utilities, how a city is able to purify and supply and store water, how it's able to move water around, maybe to farmers for irrigation purposes. It's pipes and pumps for the most part. And we definitely need a strong and resilient water sector. But I think that the most important role actually it's the one that I think we're moving forwards into around climate change is trying to see water as a connector. And I'm going to borrow a term from the intelligence community and the kind of national security community. They like to talk about climate change as this kind of source of global and regional insecurity. They see it as a threat multiplier, is the phrase in English. Where I see water really moving in among practitioners in the policy space is that actually water is the resilience multiplier. It's something that actually helps make sure that our actions across different sectors, not just the water sector, but in energy and agriculture, in how we think about natural resources, about transport, about trade and commerce. Actually, all of those elements are really connected through water. And so if we try to share water in a way that reflects the kind of emerging uncertainties that we have around it for the future, actually we can make sure that all of those sectors are coherent with each other, and that they are resilient together. That they instead of like fragmenting, they actually pull together and are stronger together.
Okay, thank you, John. So the importance that you were mentioning, has that importance being like transformed into public policy in terms of the climate change negotiation framework, or has it not? Because it's important, but it's not in paper. In terms of policy, it hasn't been framed like that. What's your opinion on that?
It's in my experience, I hear water mentioned all the time by policymakers around climate change, but it's mostly in those first two categories. water as a hazard and water as a sector. But I actually think it's changing pretty rapidly. For instance, we work with around 24 countries or so quite intensively on their national climate commitments. In global climate language, those are called NDCs, or nationally determined contributions. And of these 24 countries, many of them have really seen an evolution in how they think about their efforts to protect themselves and to get ready for current and future climate impacts. Like some quick examples, Panama and Costa Rica, both are countries that they have climate change ministries, and they have been really looking at they've almost in the past they've kind of treated their work around climate change as a lot of isolated projects. Uh, when we have engaged with them, we've been talking a lot about how water is something that is actually sometimes it's even hidden inside of those projects, and so efforts maybe to promote irrigation for farmers in one region of the country are actually potentially creating conflicts with, say, renewable energy projects in another part of the country, because they both need to share the same water resources. What we've helped them do is to be able to look and say, actually, water is expressed in all of those projects together. And how do they make sure that they can see the water and then share the water among them so that they are really effective, that they can actually be completed? And Panama and Costa Rica were already quite advanced in a lot of their climate policy work. And I think that that they even thought maybe we didn't have a lot to work on together. But it's interesting, in both cases, they've said, now we see that water is a strategic asset for us as a country. And we need to make sure that it is the way that we make sure that our country remains prosperous, that it continues to grow, that we focus on issues like equity and social justice, that we think about environmental sustainability more generally. And water is the key for all of that work.
John, based on what you were saying, do you think that strengthening water governance is an adaptation measure to climate change?
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's not just the way that we think about water that's in a river or in a pipe. It's also the way that we see water legally, and the way that we govern water, the way that we regulate water resources. And that, I think that's part of what you're asking is how is it that we actually kind of visualize water through our policies, not just around climate change, but in many areas.
Amazing, yeah, because it's a shared resource. So how do we understand the means to assign that resource in the face of what you were saying, massive uncertainty? It's a must. It's
Exactly.
and
One of the best examples that I know actually is Peru right now. And Peru has undergone a major kind of a structural transformation in its legal and governance framework and how they think about natural resources, especially ecosystems. So how they think about forest and soil and water that's in rivers and streams and lakes. And essentially, there's a lot of land that's either it's not clear who owns it, or maybe it's owned by local or national government authorities. And so they, interestingly, Peru has become the world leader in actual natural resource governance systems. And the reason that they went through that massive governance reform is so that they can actually create nature-based solutions. NBS is the English term that then can supplement built infrastructure, maybe even in some places replace it, so that we maybe are able to treat dirty water, that we might be able to help supply water for cities. We might be able to receive ecosystem services more formally from forests. And if the law can kind of see and regulate and understand it, then government authorities, government agencies, companies, individual landowners, cities can all begin to actually work with those ecosystems instead of trying to replace them with big pieces of concrete.
Okay, that's extremely interesting. So, we taking the climate change framework that we were talking about. Soon we will begin the 28th COP. How many COPs have you attended so far, John?
I'm not sure. My first COP was in 2009. I haven't been to every COP since then, but I've probably been to 10 COPs. And they're really strange as a scientist going to these COPs. Sometimes I feel a little like a fish out of water, but I also feel like it's important for practical people that are engaged with on the ground issues to really be there and to be able to represent science. I can't speak for the trees, I can't speak for the rivers, but I can at least help give them a kind of scientific voice.
Of course. John, what do you think that will be the main outcomes of COP28, and what would you wish that happens with water in this COP?
Those are two really good questions. If you're going to see a lot of news that comes out over the next few weeks around COP. There are an estimated 70,000 people who are going to United Arab Emirates, UAE, and the city of Dubai. It's a huge number of people who are going. So what should you be looking for? What would actually be kind of significant as an outcome? I'd say that you're going to hear a lot that's mentioned around the topic of climate finance. How much money are countries, especially from the global north, that are committing to helping the global south adjust to climate impacts, or to be able to invest in new areas like renewable energy. That I suspect that's going to get probably 30 or 40% of the coverage. A second piece is especially around an area that I would call the technical term for it is loss and damage. It's kind of like creating a global insurance policy, and especially it's designed not just for countries, but maybe for populations and groups of people inside of countries. So it could be like women and girls in the islands off of the coast of Bangladesh. So it should be relatively targeted. And it's meant to help with people who've been very severely, very directly impacted. Maybe indigenous populations in the Americas that might be also recipients of that kind of aid. I have mixed feelings about loss and damage. I think it's important, and we need to see it, but it's also kind of controversial. I worry that the money that's going for that may be taken away from other programs that are also really important and that may play out over longer periods of time. I don't have a set view myself, but there's going to be a lot of controversy over this area of policy. It's quite new. And a third piece of policy that I suspect is not going to be covered, but it's going to be maybe the most important in the long term. It's called the GGA, or Global Goal on Adaptation. I'd be really curious if your listeners are that they hear any coverage over it at all. The idea behind it is very simple. On climate mitigation, when we're trying to think about carbon emissions and how we store carbon from the atmosphere to pull it down out of the atmosphere, we often use the language of how many degrees we're comfortable with the Earth's air temperature rising above where it was, say, 150 years ago. And the number that people usually use as a target is 1.5 degrees. And that's a helpful number. It's a simple number. It's easy to communicate. Are we on track for 1.5 degrees? Are we on track for 2 degrees or 3 degrees? So we can kind of keep score on it. But when we think about how we adjust to and respond to, how we anticipate climate impacts, the work around climate adaptation and climate resilience, it's really hard to come up with just one number. And there have been negotiations for about a year now, maybe a year and a half, that are on this GGA, or Global Goal on Adaptation. And the best that people have been able to come up with is a kind of basket of indicators. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion that is around that. And it's important because the way that you keep score in a game, like that drives everything else, right? It's just like in football. If you know what the score is, then you know how
Yes.
to change the way you're playing. And that's the challenge that we're in right now. We don't have a really good way to keep score about how well we're doing for adaptation and resilience work. And I think that's going to be something that really drives a lot of our work. And we want to make sure that that we are representing water measurements in the GGA.
But what you were mentioning, John, so the first 2 points are economic. Basically, the economic system is adjusting to climate change. But the way that that money is being measured, its success is through it will be through the GGA. So the it will be like the steering wheel, or no, it will be like the Google Maps of
Yes.
that, and it's not receiving coverage. It's the money itself, but not the intent of the money, how it's the money expected to be spent. That's a very interesting point.
It's a really important point. I've been in many meetings with very high level policymakers, and the only way they wanted to keep score on adaptation resilience is by how much money they spent. But I can go to my wife, and she said, "Did you go to the grocery store and get the groceries I asked for?" I said, "No, this is the amount of money that I spent." She's like, "Did you get the groceries or not?" I
that's a, that's
that's an
spot
important
on.
piece of information to know, like how if how much money I spent, if I got a good deal. But the main thing is to make sure that you got the groceries.
You
Eh,
got the groceries. Yeah. So that's a really interesting point. Okay, so John, so in terms of, I mean, to finish this interview, would you please give the followers of Poder Ambiental the networks from AGWA so they can follow you, and maybe the updates that you may have on the advancements of the COP28?
Absolutely. You can follow our activities on our website, on our blog. Our website is Alliance number 4, cuatro, water, .org, alliance for water.org. You can also, using the same URL, you can follow us on X, on Twitter, and you can follow me personally on Twitter at Johoma. We're also on Facebook, and we have a strong LinkedIn presence too.
Okay, perfect. So I'll post all those links here in the description of the space. John, thank you so much for this. This is a topic that is extremely important to all the followers. So thank you very much for your time. Hopefully this is the first time that we talk, but not the last one.
Inshallah, I hope so too. And maybe just a final statement. Yeah, I want to say that globally, Latin America is, I think of as the real leader on climate adaptation and resilience, and recognizing the role of water. There's no other part of the world that I find easier to work in on these issues than in Central and South America and in the Caribbean. This is our safe area. It really, like your neighbors to the north, us gringos, we look to you for leadership in this space. So I'm really happy to be reaching your audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas por estar en este espacio, en estas conversaciones de poder ambiental, y los espero en otro espacio más adelante donde sigamos teniendo conversaciones interesantes.
Yeah. Ciao,
Muchas
ciao.
gracias. Thank you.